7:08, Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk, 99.7 WTN. Thank you very much for joining us, along with Johnny B., Ken Weaver, Dan Mandis here. Want to welcome on into the program Dakota Wood from the Heritage Foundation. Dakota, always great to have you along. And, boy, there's so much to talk about here. First of all, I'm seeing just 1 minute ago on Twitter, folks can follow me on Twitter, at Dan Mandis Show. The headline from CNN is that they're saying now that the crisis in Gaza, Israel is warning of a long war with Hamas. I've seen other people say that as well, that this could go on for a long time. We'll get into some of the specifics, but what's your initial reaction to that?
I think that people don't have a sense of history and what real warfare and real combat, especially in urban environments, is actually like, because we haven't seen it that often. Going back to 2004, there were two battles for Fallujah, first in the spring, the next in the 6 months later in the fall, and people were shocked at the brutality of house-to-house, building-to-building fighting. And then if you go back through history, Vietnam and Korea, and especially World War II, these things do not resolve very quickly at all. So I think in the public psyche and even in our government officials, there's this idea of precision strikes that go in to hit a terrorist group. The thing is all wrapped up in a couple of days or a week or, at most, and then everybody goes home to kind of lick their wounds. And what we're seeing play out here is how ferocious fighting can be and how hard it is to bring to an end when both sides want to continue fighting. I mean, the fighting could end if Hamas gave up. The fighting could end if Israel decided, well, we've imposed enough punishment, in revenge of the attack that occurred there a few weeks ago, and everything would be good to go. You could do a ceasefire and allow lots of supplies into Gaza, but Hamas would just suck those things up and use it to continue their attacks. So it's just an ugly, deadly reminder of what war is actually like. And even if you think back, Dan, a year and a half ago, the initial push of Russia into Ukraine, the atrocities that were being reported, right? The rape and the murder, the desecration of dead bodies, the kidnappings, the taking of children from eastern Ukraine into Russia. We seem to have forgotten that, and that's less than 2 years ago. So it's just an ugly reminder of what war really is.
One of the things that's in the news this morning, overnight we saw Muslims targeting an airport in northern Russia. Now, they were said to be, there's no other way to put it, hunting Jews as a plane landed from Tel Aviv. Have you seen that story, and what do you make of it?
Well, I have, and I think it's similar to the pro-Palestinian marches that we have seen in many capitals around the world. I mean, even in New York City and in London, there were like 100,000 people carrying Palestinian flags marching through the streets of what used to be English London, right? And so this storming of the tarmac, it didn't happen spontaneously. I mean, you don't have people that say, I wonder if there's going to be, an Israeli flight that lands at the airport. So it had to have been organized in some way. Vladimir Putin has clearly been on the side of the Gazans or the Palestinians, cozying up to this Islamist cause. And so I don't know this with evidence, but I suspect it was fomented by the Russians to get pro-Palestinian protesters out there to make a statement. And, it's an example of this rise of anti-Semitism, spray-painted anti-Israeli, anti-Jew slogans on walls, sit-ins and marches inside of American universities. So, the thing in Moscow happened, but it is a reflection of, or another example of, this growing anti-Israel movement because of the social media sharing and the propaganda value of Israel's response against Hamas, and then Hamas not allowing civilians to leave the battle zone.
Dakota Wood joining us from the Heritage Foundation, foreign policy analyst and our guest on Nashville's Morning News. Let me ask you, talk about the anti-Semitism that seems to be growing across the world and here in America as well. Has it always been there, or is it just now beginning to grow and the spotlight is more on it now? Is this anti-Semitism going to get worse as this war continues to rage on?
The last part, yes. It will get worse as the war goes on because we're going to see more and more images of the brutality of urban fighting, and you can bet that Hamas and others, if not supporters of Hamas, and certainly critics and enemies of the state of Israel, will use this escalating plight of civilians in the Gaza Strip, the aid convoys, people huddled together in UN relief shelter areas and all that stuff. They're going to use those images to foment more anti-Israeli and specifically anti-Jew attitudes in these crowds around the world. Has it always been there? I think in a latent sense, yes. I mean, look how many wars have been fought in the Middle East where Arabs, various coalitions and groups or terrorist organizations have been attacking Israel for decades. So this attack by Hamas was extraordinary in its brutality and suddenness, but Hamas has been firing thousands, with a plural, of rockets into Israel for 20 years. I mean, it's been more than 20 years, 30 years of Hezbollah from southern Lebanon into Israel and attacks from Syria. So this anti-Israeli sentiment is not new, but it's exacerbated by what we're seeing. And I think what adds to this is this prevailing sense through academia here in the United States and abroad as well, that if you're a protest group of some type, you're given great license to do things. Look at the youth mobs that go through some of our American cities and loot and ransack stores with very little repercussions or consequences to that. And yet somebody trying to protest against that, like a store owner, a homeowner, somebody standing up for the state of Israel, they're silenced, right? That you're not allowing this free expression of extraordinary violence. And so I think it's all part of a bigger zeitgeist. Zeitgeist, is that the German word for this cultural mood, this moment in time where we have allowed things to start spiraling out of control, and this is a consequence that we're seeing today.
Foreign policy analyst Dakota Wood joining us from the Heritage Foundation, Super Talk 99.7. Dakota, let's talk about these tunnels for a minute. These tunnels, they are now finding out, and you've been telling us this for a long time, but now they're reporting that these tunnels underneath Gaza's schools and hospitals, this is where Hamas, I'm assuming, is keeping their hostages and their headquarters. How vast are these tunnels?
Well, in excess of 300 miles. 300 miles. Wow. A decade ago, Hamas was bragging that they were that extensive. There were a lot of critics that say, no, it's probably not that much. But that was 10 years ago. And now what Israel is finding as they move into that area and various mapping techniques that they can use is that they truly are that extensive. Some of these things go down 250 feet underground. So it's almost like a mining operation, and then they cut across. And there are planning rooms, movement corridors. They have supplies down there, very difficult to get to with munitions, although there are, if you remember the bunker buster, these deep penetrating munitions from previous wars that use incredible shock waves to try to collapse tunnels. So that's why Israel has been using these sorts of things. But it would make sense that hostages are being held in an area where they can be kept alive so that they can be used as bargaining chips, right? That if they were in some street level or an apartment building complex and they were killed, would Hamas then, have something to use? So they are extraordinarily difficult to navigate. The Israelis have to find their way through them once they get inside, or seal them up so that Hamas can't use them. And we've seen these in other periods of warfare as well. Vietnam was a big deal, where there were a lot of tunnels being used by Viet Cong.
Some are saying that the normalization deal, I was talking about this earlier in the program, Dakota Wood from the Heritage Foundation joining us. Some are saying that this normalization deal being brokered by the U.S. Between Israel, Saudi Arabia, and, of course, America as well, may not be dead. That's what the Wall Street Journal and others are reporting this morning. This deal includes security and economic partnerships, nuclear enrichment deals as well. Can this deal be salvaged? And then the part two of the question is going to be, can we trust Saudi Arabia in this type of a partnership, especially with the nuclear technology? What do you say?
Well, Yeah, trust is kind of a relative term.
Yes.
You want to look at the other party and try to understand what is their interest in this. So if you're sitting in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and you're considering domestic, economic, foreign policy sorts of things, which all relate. I mean, Saudi Arabia doesn't sell refrigerators or microwaves. They sell energy, and that's really about it. So if their country gets embroiled in a war, and they have a compact, the government has an agreement with the people to subsidize all sorts of energy-related things, to have subsidies in their daily living expenses and all that. You can't afford, if you want to maintain your control, your hold on power, you can't afford to have a hugely destabilizing war. And so in one sense, Saudi Arabia will want to try to normalize relations with Israel so that a relative peace is economically beneficial to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and keeps down domestic turmoil and tension. On the other hand, they're very aware of their domestic population, right? And how the population at the street level, spurred on and kind of, prodded and fomented by a lot of these religious leaders, what their views of Israel are, and Jews in particular, and whether there is pro-Palestinian sentiment. And in many ways, there is. Hamas is Sunni. The vast majority of Saudi Arabia is Sunni Islam as well. And so they're trying to find a balance there in Riyadh. So it goes back to the question, is it salvageable? I think yes, because Saudi Arabia has a greater interest economically in maintaining hold on power over time. But today, probably absolutely not. So we don't want to call it dead. I think we have to push the normalization on down the road once we see how this Gaza issue plays out.
I guess one of the questions I would ask is, whose side is Saudi Arabia's on? I mean, besides their own, but I mean, you've got, of course, Israel and you've got Saudi Arabia, mostly Muslim nation. So who are they siding with, the Palestinians or Israel?
Well, I think you answered your own question, is that they're on their own side. They are opportunists, and the Saudi family many years ago, 150 years ago or so, struck a deal with a Wahhabi Muslim or Islamist sect that the Wahhabis would give them religious legitimacy as a ruling clan, so long as the ruling clan, the Saud family, promoted Wahhabism. I'm terrible with these words. But that form of Islamic belief and propagate that worldwide. And so there is this relationship inside of Saudi Arabia of how the Saudi family maintains its control on power. It's Arab against Persian over in Iran, Saudi Arabia versus the country of Iran, who has religious power and authority and identities. And so the Saudis are always trying to manage that balance to maintain their preeminent position within Islam. Most Muslims are Sunni. They control the two holy sites of Mecca and Medina. The family wants to maintain its hold on power, which is dependent on the sale of oil. So you can see how all these things are interrelated. So they will pick either backing Hamas or Hezbollah or backing the government of Israel, depending on their assessment of what gets them to their ultimate objectives of maintaining power.
Dakota Wood, always great to have you on from the Heritage Foundation. Thank you very much.